Welcome into another episode of Locked On Phillies, folks. And today we're going to be previewing the Phils weekend series with the Chicago White Sox. Very similar to the Rockies series. This is a winnable one for the Philadelphia Phillies. Is it a sweepable one? Well, we'll get into that conversation as we take a look forward at the next three games. Also, have the expectations changed at all for the year? The Phillies are starting to heat up a little bit, and there's been a reshaping of the landscape in the division. Also, we'll do a standings check-in just because we have the time. All of that on today's episode of Locked On Phillies.
You are Locked On Phillies, your daily Philadelphia Phillies podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, this is Locked On Phillies. I'm Connor Thomas, your host. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Please make sure you're rating, reviewing, subscribing to the YouTube, all that great stuff. It really helps us out here on Locked On Phillies. If you enjoy the content, would love it if you could do that for me. And today's episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. Go ahead and check them out. They're the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnMLB and use code, it's all lowercase, LockedOnMLB for a first deposit match up to $100. The Phillies are set to take on the White Sox in the final three games of this long 10-game homestand that the Phils have been on. And it's a very winnable series for the Phillies. Just say that right off the rip. The Phillies just swept out the Colorado Rockies. The White Sox, they're 3-15 right now. That is a record that is very similar to those Colorado Rockies that you just played. The Rockies are 4-15. The White Sox 3-15. Now, some of those games in the series with the Rockies were close games. So you'd feel like you should see more games where the Phillies actually put the White Sox away this weekend. I'll relay it out for you because in case you've missed previous series previews, I should say, I very rarely come out and say, hey, sweep inbound. They're going to win all three games or all four games. Like I try and shy away from that because as much as the White Sox are a lesser team than the Philadelphia Phillies, you never know. They've got 3 wins. They find a way sometimes, lesser teams. Baseball's a weird thing, right? It's hard to win 3 games in a row with 3 different pitchers on the mound on 3 different days with different lineup. Like you could run into a great outing. You could run into a weird game. You never know how that's going to play out. But what I will say is the full expectation is for the Philadelphia Phillies to win this series. If the Phillies don't win 2 out of 3 against the White Sox, that is a failure in this series for the Philadelphia Phillies. And I'll tell you why here as we take a look at the White Sox and what they do well, and more importantly, what they don't do well. Let's start with the pitching matchups, though, because there's something you should know about the White Sox. So far this year, through their first 18 games, pitching hasn't been their main issue. It is not. At least not starting pitching has not been their main issue. You're going to see Garrett Crochet tonight facing off against Spencer Turnbull. Turnbull's been very good. Turnbull's 1-0 with a 1.80 ERA. The numbers look great. That's why we had the conversation in yesterday's episode. You can go ahead and check it out about what happens when Taijuan Walker comes back and is available. Does Turnbull go to the pen? That's a tough conversation to have. I'm glad I'm not the manager of the Philadelphia Phillies. But Turnbull's been good. Garrett Crochet's numbers aren't bad, honestly. He's 1-2, so the record doesn't look great. The record is more of a team stat than a pitcher stat, but a 3.57 ERA. It's fine. It's admirable. And a 0.84 whip. That's the number you really want to look at. In 22 2/3 innings pitched, this guy is giving up less than a base runner an inning. That's a pretty darn good number, especially considering you're pitching for the Chicago White Sox. So tough lefty in Crochet. We'll see if the Phillies have success against him tonight. But you see the numbers there. You're like, okay, that's a solid pitcher. And then you look at what's going on in game 2 of this series, which will be tomorrow. You know this name, Michael Soroka. He's a guy that you saw in Atlanta for years down there. He's going to face Wheeler. So Wheeler's obviously got the advantage, but Wheeler's 0-3 on the year. So the Phillies, are they able to build a little bit of run support for their ace? We'll see that. Soroka hasn't had a great start to the year. 0-2, 6.98 ERA, a whip around 1.7. Like, he's not a top-of-the-line pitcher right now, but he has the pedigree. We saw him in Atlanta. We know he's capable of good outings. That's not a name where you see it and you say, okay, no problem. That's a win. Like, that could be one of those weird starts. And then the final projected pitcher is Nick Nastrini, who the White Sox acquired over the offseason, formerly with the Dodgers. And he's 0-1 through 5 innings pitched. He's got 1 loss on the year, but a 3.6 ERA with a 1 even whip. You hear all that and you're like, okay, those are solid pitching numbers. For example, like Aaron Nola has a 3.47 ERA right now. He's been pretty darn good, a 1.24 whip. Like, those are comparable numbers to Nastrini, and Nastrini has less innings pitched, but you hear that and you probably think what I thought when I was running through the breakdown ahead of the episode, and I was like, okay, what exactly is going to be the headline for this series? Well, the pitching is not the problem for the White Sox. They're going to be able to pitch. Here's what the problem for the White Sox is. Let's look at their leaders statistically offensively. So home runs, not awful. Paul DeJong, is it DeJong or DeJong? I never know how to pronounce that name. Anyway, you know who he is. You remember him first time in the Cardinals. He's got 3 homers to lead the ball club. As far as RBIs, Gavin Sheets is leading the team with 9 RBIs for the White Sox. But here's where they fall apart. Their batting average leader is Andrew Benintendi. And you might say, okay, I remember him when he came up with the Red Sox. And he was called Benny Biceps for a reason. The guy can swing it a little bit and leading an average. I guess that kind of makes sense. I recognize that name. You know what he's batting this year? He's batting 175, and that is the qualified highest batting average for the Chicago White Sox. They cannot hit the baseball at all. Let me run through this a little bit. Vaughn hitting 167, Benintendi 175, Fletcher 234, Gavin Sheets 250. Now, he hasn't had enough to qualify for the team lead in average. Lopez 167. Like, they've got a couple guys in the mid to high 200s. They don't have a single player on their major league roster that's hitting above, let me find the highest mark, none above 300, no one hitting above 282. For comparison with the Philadelphia Phillies when it comes to that, remember, the number to beat is 282, and that's all batters who have taken at bats, not just qualified ones. Trey Turner's clearing that. Brandon Marsh is clearing that. Edmundo Sosa's clearing that. Christian Pache's clearing that. I mean, you've got multiple guys that are above that. And you also have a lineup that has more pop and everything like that. It's remarkable that the White Sox have been unable to put together somewhat of better numbers this year. But again, they're who's who of who's. If that makes sense. You get what I mean by that? They're a lineup that is combined with guys where you're like either, oh, I forgot about that guy, or I never heard of that guy. And all due respect to the White Sox, they are a major league team. That's why I'm not coming on here and telling you Phillies sweep, no problem. Like, that's just not realistic at the major league level. It's not. I know some fans are feeling chesty after sweeping the Rockies and saying, well, why don't you predict another sweep? Clearly they're capable of it. And to that, I'd say winning 6 games in a row is tough, right? Every time you compound upon that, it becomes less and less likely they're going to continue to just win out against these teams, no matter how much of an advantage it seems the Phillies have on paper. And the Phillies have a great advantage on paper. But I will say, if they don't win this series, I will be sorely disappointed in the Philadelphia Phillies. I mean, just looking at tonight's game, according to the ESPN analytics, 58.5% chance to win for the Philadelphia Phillies tonight. Tomorrow, 78.2% chance. That's a huge advantage. That's because they got Wheeler on the mound. And then when you look at the final game of the series with Nola, 67.9% chance. So it's expected that the Philadelphia Phillies are going to win every game in the series, at least based on the percentages from the ESPN analytics. I'm a little bit more tempered in my expectations, as usual. You always hear me on here trying to be a little bit more conservative, a little bit more realistic. I might be right, I might be wrong, but I always try and be real with you. And I always try and treat series as an opportunity to win a series, not so much an opportunity to sweep series. But if you're going to sweep a team, right, this is probably one of the teams in baseball that's most apt to be swept. For my money right now, the Chicago White Sox are probably the worst team in the major leagues. Yes, that includes the Oakland or wherever they're playing now Athletics and the Rockies you just faced and any other teams you're thinking of that are down near the bottom of the standings. We'll talk about the standings later on in this episode. But the White Sox are not a good baseball team. The Philadelphia Phillies are a good baseball team. They're 11-8. They're 3 games over 500. They should improve on that in this series, and you should feel good about the Philadelphia Phillies' chances in this one. But should you feel good about the Philadelphia Phillies' chances for the year? And how have expectations changed for me and for the fan base and for the league in general when they look at the Philadelphia Phillies as far as what they've done so far this year? I'm going to get into a conversation about those shifting, or maybe shouldn't be shifting, expectations as we continue today's episode of Locked On Phillies. And let's talk about FanDuel. It's playoff time in the NBA and the NHL. Baseball's in full swing, and FanDuel is your place to bet on every game. You're going to want to check it out. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. You make your first bet, you get $150 in bonus bets. So you can use to bet on whatever you'd like. Everything from slap shots to home runs to slam dunks, all on an app that's safe, secure, and easy to use. So what are you waiting for? Are you waiting for the Sixers to play this weekend? Sixers play the Knicks in the first round of the Eastern Conference playoffs. Game 1 is tomorrow. And if you're a big Philly sports fan like me, you know the big man, he's been pretty good at Madison Square Garden. Look at Joel Embiid. Maybe place a wager on him. So go to FanDuel.com/lockedon and make your first bet an automatic win. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. This is a fair question, I think. And every once in a while, we need to evaluate this because we get caught in the everyday nature of baseball. You get so caught up in the next step, you forget about the journey. And sometimes when you have an opportunity, an off day yesterday, we got some weird miscellaneous Phillies thoughts about the team out of my head yesterday. And some I thought were very interesting. So you can go ahead and check that out in yesterday's episode. But you also have to take stock of how your feeling on the team has shifted since the start of the season. I'll tell you the things that have changed for me since the start of the season and the things that haven't changed. In fact, let's start with the things that haven't changed. The number one thing that I have kept through these first, 11-8, so 19 games, I felt good about the ceiling of this team. I still do. It happens every year. I try and make a determination before the season based on the skill on the roster. Like, what does this team look like on paper? Because more often than not, baseball paper is clearest to reality. Like, you have 162 games to prove that you're the players and team we think you are. And normally, you don't see too many full season surprises. You'll see a slow start. You'll see a slump. You'll see maybe a player drop off for a couple months, but you won't see a whole team all that often. It does happen, but all that often, you won't see a whole team completely collapse and fall short, majorly short of expectations. So my thoughts on the ceiling of this team has not changed. Could the Philadelphia Phillies win the World Series this year? Absolutely, they can, 100%. Could the Philadelphia Phillies win the National League again? Of course. Could the Philadelphia Phillies win their division? Now, that's an interesting one. We're going to talk about the standings coming up in our final segment of today's episode, but some things that have changed. Well, yeah, the Braves lost Spencer Strider. I know we talked about that a little bit, but that changes kind of the expectations in the division. So do I feel better today on April 19th than I did on opening day, March 28th, about the Phillies' chances to win the division? I absolutely do. How could you not? If Zach Wheeler went down, do you think that the Braves would feel better about their chances to beat the Phillies? Yes. So Spencer Strider going down for the year, needing Tommy John surgery, that's absolutely something. I'm not happy about the injury, right? I'm not sitting here like, yay, Spencer Strider got hurt. No, you never want to see a guy get hurt. And he's one of my favorite pitchers to watch just from an objective, like, this dude is awesome to see on the mound type of perspective. The baseball's better with Spencer Strider. And it's unfortunate that he's done for the year. But the reality of that is the Phillies' path got easier in the division because of Spencer Strider going down. So that's something that changes the expectations for the division. I'm still not confident enough to say, oh, yeah, Phil's better win the division, but it's become much more of a race in my mind since that injury. So that's the expectations as far as the overall nature of the team. The expectations for some individual players. The starting rotation, honestly, dude, my expectations have been too low to start the season. And I was more lofty than most fans, I feel like. But they have proven they're the best staff in the National League. They're probably the best staff in baseball. If they keep this up, which no reason why they shouldn't, they're going to be an unbelievably good pitching staff. This is the best Philly staff since 2010 with the four aces: Halladay, Hamels, Oswalt, Lee, and of course Joe Blanton in there. Can't forget about my guy Joe. But This is the best starting rotation the Phillies have had since that year. I feel very confident in saying that, and the numbers back it up to this point. So I'm going to have to raise my expectations. You know what? This kind of leads into a bigger style type of conversation about the Phillies. I had this thought the other day, and I don't know that I've fully verbalized it yet on the podcast, but let me flesh this idea out real quick for you. We look at the Phillies, because of years past, as a team that, you remember, it's that ball go boom, like they're sluggers. They're built to hit the ball out of the yard, create offense, defense be damned, and we're going to go out there and just score 10 runs to your 9 and beat the brakes off your pitching. That's what we, I think, have been conditioned to think of the Phillies as. And that's why when the offense struggles, the fan base gets worked up. And I understand that, but you have to change your evaluation of the team year to year. And you have to change it almost kind of week to week as far as what's working for the team. The offense hasn't been great. So you might say, well, offense hasn't been great. How are they 11-8? It's because the pitching has been unbelievable. And here's something. There are other ways to win in baseball than just hitting the ball out of the yard. I'm not talking about small ball. I'm saying there have been teams, plenty of teams. You go back and you look at the history of this wonderful game. There have been so many teams that have won championships, lots of games in the regular season because of great pitching and great defense. Now, I don't know that I can call the Phillies a great defensive team right now. Are they a good defensive team? I like to think so. Could you argue they're closer to average? Sure. But what you can't argue is average is the pitching staff, right? So let's call it average defense at worst. Elite level pitching. Like this team's calling card, there's nothing in the laws of the sport, right? Nothing in the rules of baseball that say that team that plays in Philadelphia has to be an offense first team. So when I see them winning because of pitching, I say, okay, maybe when all things are all said and done, the offense will find itself. They're going to slug. I say that almost every episode now because I love that quote from Rob Thompson. We're going to slug. He's right. They're going to, but we might have to start looking at this team as a team that's calling card is their pitching. They're a defense and pitching first team. I say that just because defense and pitching go hand in hand, not because the defense is carrying them, though it has been good recently. But they're a pitching and defense first team that's going to stifle opposing offenses. And then if the offense gets going for the Phillies, they're going to be really, really hard to beat. And if it doesn't, they're still going to be pretty darn hard to beat. And that's how you win in the postseason. Your pitching has to be great. We've seen that the past couple of years with what Zach Wheeler and Aaron Nola and Ranger Suarez have done and the bullpen has done as they made the run to the World Series 2 years ago, the NLCS this past year. But all of that, you had heavy offense and a lot of home runs. And I think we grew accustomed to that being the way the Phillies win. Well, we need to start opening our minds to the possibility that this team has found a way to win in a different way. And that's totally fine. So that's what I think about like day in and day out. Where do my expectations change based on how this team is playing and how I expect this team to play in the future? So if you think I'm crazy, if you think I'm misevaluating this, let me know in the comments. And also, I'd love to know, right? I don't ask this from you enough, but I constantly talk about, oh, the fan base wanted this pitcher, that pitcher over the offseason, and I told you no. And I want to sound like the smartest guy in the room, don't we all? But I also don't often give you a chance to say, hey, maybe you were one of those people this offseason, but have you gotten to a point where you flipped around on the Phillies, where you said, okay, I would have liked to see Blake Snell in a Phillies uniform. I would have liked to see Jordan Montgomery in a Phillies uniform. But now that I see it out on the field, I totally have flipped, and I trust this pitching staff. And I'm at a point where I'm really happy with where they're at. Like, it's easy to be wrong. I'm wrong all the time. And some people in the offseason may have made a change and reevaluated, reset their expectations too. So let me know in the comments if you've had a change in expectations with the Phillies, or maybe you're a curmudgeon who just saw a rough start to the year offensively and the record was a little bit shaky early and you're like, oh, well, this team isn't as good as I thought they were, and I'm sticking to that evaluation. Listen, nobody's wrong until the end of the season. So you got a long way to go until any of us are proven one way or another. I'd love to see your thoughts in the comments to that, but those are how my expectations have shifted since the start of the season. Coming up next, we're going to do a quick check-in on the standings. Haven't done this since last week, so we'll take a look at where the Phils are at, take a look at where the league is at, who are the teams that are really getting off the hot starts, and how does it affect everything from the playoff picture? Not that it's playoff time. It's April 19th. We're not, come on. But I like to do a little check-in every once in a while to see what's going on with that. So we'll get into that coming up as we wrap up today's episode. But I got to tell you about Prize Picks first. Come on. Prize Picks is America's #1 fantasy sports app. They got more than 3 million members. It is the easiest and most exciting way to get in on the action while you watch your favorite sports and players. You just pick more or less on 2 or more player stats, and you watch those winnings roll in. That's right. I mean, spring training's over. You know, baseball season's rolling. Don't miss your chance to add your favorite players from the diamond in your Prize Picks entries. Could be strikeouts, RBIs, first inning runs. Take your pick of more or less and add them to your Prize Picks entry today. You got a tough lefty on the mound tonight in Crochet with the White Sox. Look at the righties. Maybe look at Trey Turner. He's been hot lately. He's on a hitting streak. JT Realmuto's been hot lately. Now, Spencer Turnbull's pitching, so it'll probably be Garrett Stubbs. But, hey, look at those righties. Castellanos, is this the first extra base hit of his season? Maybe. So go ahead and check it out on Prize Picks. They got everything. You just pick more or less on those players or any players that they offer, and you can find a way to get some winnings. And plus, you download the app today and use code LOCKEDONMLB. You'll get a first deposit match up to $100. Again, download the app today and use code LOCKEDONMLB. You'll get a first deposit match up to $100. Prize Picks. Pick more or pick less. It's that easy. All right, a standings check-in. This is always fun. I like to see it because I honestly don't check the standings ever unless I'm doing this with you on this podcast. This is the only time that I look at standings around baseball. And we're just going to kind of go through the division winners, or division leaders, I should say. And then we'll do a deeper dive once we get to the National League. But the Yankees are leading the American League East. All of those teams are double digits in wins. The only division in baseball where every team has 10 wins or more. We knew that was going to be a juggernaut division. The Cleveland Guardians, off to a hot start, 13-6, leading the American League Central. Kansas City Royals, 12-7, right behind them. Good starts for those teams. Was not expecting that. Texas Rangers, off to a hot start in the West. They're leading. They're 11-9. The Astros in last place. Who saw that coming? But yeah, Texas, the defending World Series champions, defending their crown so far, only through 18 games. Let's go through the rest of the divisions in the National League before we get to the East. The Dodgers are leading the West. No surprise there. The Brewers are leading the Central. That division is very up for grabs. 2 teams at the bottom have 9 wins each. So they're not far off that pace being set by the American League East. And then we get to home base. The National League East. The Miami Marlins are in last place, 4-15, a dreadful start to the year for them. The Nationals are actually making some noise, 8-10, not a winning record, but better than they've done in past years. The Mets, after an abysmal start, are 10-8, 2 games above 500. They've started to pick it up. And the Phillies are 11-8 in second place in the division. They're only 2 games back of the Braves, who are 12-5. Now, obviously, 17 games played for Atlanta, 19 for the Phillies, so a bit of a difference in games played. That'll happen throughout the year. But the Phillies are not too far off from the Atlanta Braves. They're well within striking distance. Atlanta's not running away with anything. And when you look at the league, Atlanta has the best record in the National League at 12-5. The Brewers are 11-6. The Cubs are 11-7. The Phillies are 11-8. And those Pirates, those pesky Pirates, are 11-8. Now, the Dodgers have 12 wins, but they have 9 losses. They played more games because of that early series. The Phils, by percentage points, are tied for 4th best in the National League. So they're up there, man. They're also, this is where people get upset, right? Of the top 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 teams in the National League, all of those teams have a positive run differential, which means if you add up all the deficit and the way, how much you've won by or lost by, there's only one team that has a negative run differential in those top 9. It's the Philadelphia Phillies. So, yeah, tight games, offensive production, it needs to pick up. And yet, in spite of that, you're still the 4th best team, or tied for the 4th best team in the National League. You know what that says to me? When they get this offense figured out, this team's going to be a problem. And that's something to look forward to. Hopefully it's a great weekend. Hopefully they can get 2 of 3 from the White Sox, maybe even a sweep. And we got some fun stuff to talk about Monday, but that's all for today's episode. Again, we're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you so much for checking us out here on Locked On Phillies. If you like the content, please subscribe to the YouTube, rate and review where you consume your podcasts, all that great stuff. And I'll talk to you next time on the next episode of Locked On Phillies.